I call to order the Gladstone City Council work session for Tuesday, November 28th, 2023. It's 5:30 p.m. The City of Gladstone is abiding by guidelines set forth in House Bill 2560, which requires the governing body of the public body, to the extent reasonably possible, to make all meetings accessible remotely through technological means and provide opportunity for members of the general public to remotely submit oral and written testimony during meetings to the extent or in-person oral and written testimony is allowed. Therefore, this meeting will be open to the public both in person and virtually using the Zoom platform. The Zoom instructions are printed on the agenda of the meeting. The public is welcome to attend the work session in person or online. However, no public comment happens during work sessions. This is our opportunity to explore some issues in depth and reach some consensus and make some recommendations for future action so that staff can bring forward some things that we can consider at a future date. Tammy, will you call the roll, please?
Councillor Huckabee.
Present.
Councillor Alexander.
Yes.
Councillor Reichel.
Present.
Councillor Cook.
Present.
Councillor Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Garlington.
Present.
Mayor Milch.
Present. Please stand for the flag salute. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have 3 items on our work session agenda tonight. One is a presentation regarding the Tree City USA program. Then we'll consider next steps for the proposed Gladstone Youth Council. And finally, continue our discussion on our city council goal of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So item 1, staff, will you introduce this for us?
I'd be happy to. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. So several months ago, we had a resident approach the mayor about becoming a tree city in Gladstone. And originally I looked through this and thought, well, this should be fairly simple for us to accomplish. And I got in touch with Brittany Oxford, who's the Community Assistance Forester from the State of Oregon Department of Forestry, who is fantastic. And after we started talking through this, I decided it's a little bit more complex than just putting together a declaration. So tonight she's going to give you a presentation on what it takes to become a Tree City USA through their program. And then we'll need to make a decision as to whether or not this is something that the City Council would like to pursue. So with that, I will hand it over to Brittany.
You guys hear me?
We can.
Okay. This is cool. I haven't done this in person in a while, so. Great. That works. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about the Tree City USA program, as well as some other support from ODF. My name is Brittany Oxford. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Community Assistance Forester for the Oregon Department of Forestry, which is just a long way of saying that I support urban forestry efforts throughout all of Oregon. A lot of that includes municipalities, and I am the state coordinator for the Tree City USA program. So I would love to answer any questions you have. So really briefly, I just kind of want to go over what the value of the trees in Gladstone is, what the program actually entails, the benefits of joining the program, and then the actual standards that you'll need to meet in order to become a tree city. So first, value. Trees are actually infrastructure, and I don't think that people talk about that enough and what they do for us. So they clean our air, they filter stormwater, and actually reduce a lot of costs and produce a lot of benefits for us in our communities. And I'll get into that in a bit. They also have a tremendous health impacts for our communities. And they're a big part of our legacy because the trees that we plant today are going to influence what the environment looks like for future generations. And they're a wise financial investment. So worth our time, worth our resources. Humans instinctively prefer natural settings. So green spaces actually provide a lot of opportunity for community engagement. It increases productivity and reduces symptoms of things like ADHD, stress, anxiety, and a lot of other health benefits, as well as decreasing crime rates, which is scientific stuff that I've been getting into recently that's fascinating. So other values, more financial, they actually increase property values, and studies have shown that streets that are lined with trees actually produce more frequent and longer shopping. So good for business in our communities. The shoppers spend more time and more money for goods and parking in areas that have more tree canopy. And another thing that I like to point out at meetings like this is that Gladstone's already spending money on trees, right? So if a tree falls down on one of your streets, the city has to deal with that. So a nice thing about the Tree City USA program is it just sort of creates a starting point for actively managing your forest in a way that's going to maximize benefits for you and minimize those costs. So one thing that is interesting, a study came out of Arizona, is that 100 trees actually 100 mature trees, I think sequestered 26 tons of carbon in 1 year. So that's good for our changing climate, and also filtered 300 pounds of other pollutants, so massive human health impacts. And their cooling effects were equivalent to 1,000 air conditioning units for those trees. So pretty valuable, especially if you consider the fact that the #1 cause of death for natural disasters is actually heat-related incidents. So that's earthquakes and tornadoes, everything else combined, heat deaths are higher. So trees are going to actually help prevent those kinds of things in our community. So public safety. And then another benefit and value is that those 100 mature trees also captured more than 200,000 gallons of rainwater. So that's pretty significant boost. Your public works people would appreciate that. And then if we look kind of at the financial value of this, the benefits of those trees, not even including the human health side of it, equated about $161,000 in this study, and the costs for maintaining those trees was around $89,000, so net positive is $72,000 for that year. So what is this program and how does that relate to the value of trees? Well, Tree City USA is sort of a nationally recognized program that sort of makes you recognized as a community that is actively managing their urban forest. And it's recognized from the National Association of State Foresters. So I'm a state forester, and the United States Forest Service, which is our national program. And the Arbor Day Foundation is the hosting sort of entity, and they're a not-for-profit. So it provides direction, technical assistance, public attention and good media, and national recognition. So the program was launched in 1976, and you have to apply every year. So longevity, you're committed each year. The impact since then, there's been, over 135 million people now live in or near a Tree City community. And a lot of the times recently in Oregon, I've been hearing this sort of thing where Jackie, for instance, reached out to me because some community members actually reached out to you guys. And it's nice for me because it's like the community is advocating for this and it's a good place to start from. And then it also plugs you into a network of communities that could support you with urban forestry work. So a little bit more specific to Oregon, we have 71 tree cities. Yay. Last year, Halsey was our newest one, and I'm trying to grow that every year. So that's a big part of my job. And if you're interested, we do have a story map to learn more about each of our cities and what they're doing with their trees. That's on our website and that link there. And then I'm your state reviewer. So my whole job is to support you and make this process as easy as possible. And I've had about a year experience in this position now, so I know a lot of the loopholes and things that the Arbor Day Foundation actually needs to see in the application in order for it to get approved each year, and what's not going to work too. Something that's unique in Oregon is that we have a work plan requirement from our program. And what that is just a forward-looking plan for tree work for the next year. So for 2023 applications, you'll have to submit a plan for 2024. And the reason that we came up with this standard in Oregon is that we want to know that you're committed for trees in the future and not just trees for that year. So what are benefits of being a Tree City USA? Well, it provides a framework for action, sort of lets you know that you're on the right track for managing your urban forest and the trees that you do have. It could be a good starting point for other things like creating an urban forestry management plan, hiring a certified arborist if you don't have one, or an urban forester, creating an inventory, which we can talk about later, because those are all things that I also support municipalities with specifically. It's an educational opportunity and an opportunity for you all to work with me more closely and get some technical assistance. I'm a certified arborist and work with trees quite a lot, and I like looking at them. So if you ever have issues with your trees in your community, I'm around. Public image. There's a reason why there are so many street names named after trees, right? People like trees. And seeing things like this Tree City USA sign really means something to a lot of community members. And maybe it could be a decision of why someone would want to start a business in Gladstone or move to Gladstone. It kind of increases desirability. And that kind of leads to this other point that I really love talking about, which is citizen pride, community involvement, which is sort of creates itself, because once you have that pride, more volunteerism starts to happen, more people start to get involved, and they sort of support that process as an ecosystem. It's good press, good publicity. Every year we have a presentation of the Tree City USA Award that you get mailed. Arbor Day celebration is one of the standards, so you'll have to celebrate, and that's sort of a good public image to be having and an opportunity for public education around trees. So what do you actually need to do in order to be a Tree City? There are 4 standards with the Arbor Day Foundation. The first is to have a tree board or designated department, so someone that's responsible for trees in your city. The second is to have a tree care ordinance, so something written into your law. The third is to spend at least $2 per capita on trees in your community. And that's actually a pretty low bar, pretty easy to meet, and you are likely already spending that. And the reason that that standard kind of exists is so that we know that you're tracking expenses that you're spending on your trees each year. And then the 4th standard is to observe Arbor Day and have your mayor proclaim it each year. So the tree board or the department, that could be someone within city staff. It could be a group of volunteer citizens or a combination of both. Most of the time I see a combination, but I can help you sort of with the tree board standard. Just making sure that someone is legally responsible for the management of trees and meeting regularly to talk about them. The next standard is a tree care ordinance, which will establish your tree board and give some responsibility to that board. It'll provide guidance and best management practices for planting, maintaining, and removing publicly owned trees, and gives an opportunity to set good policy that's legally enforceable. And I have reviewed a lot of ordinances and updates, so I'm happy to help here as well. And then the 3rd standard is a community forestry program that spends at least $2 per capita. There's a lot of expenses that you can use for this standard, including the value of volunteer labor, Arbor Day celebration expenses, tree care, tree planting, city workers' time, things like that. Arbor Day observance and proclamation. So, you could do tree plantings. Lots of folks like to do that. Award ceremonies, educational things. Some communities will loop that into an Earth Day celebration and have it be part of that. So there's a lot of different options for this standard. and then proclaim Arbor Day or Arbor Month. In Oregon, we like to do Arbor Month, and you actually don't have to celebrate it in April. If a different month works for you in Gladstone, it's up to you. It just has to happen within the year that you apply. So really the steps are get Gladstone to meet those 4 standards, complete and upload the application. Each year in Oregon, that's due on December 15th, and it's completely free. And you can find all the information you need on the Arbor Day Foundation's website under the Tree City USA tab. So yeah, trees are valuable. The program helps you to track that value and maximize the benefits of that. Having a Tree City USA standard has lots of benefits, and it's got the 4 Arbor Day Foundation standards that are pretty straightforward. And I like to leave everyone with a tree quote, so bear with me. Henry David Thoreau said that a town is saved not by the righteous men in it, but by the woods that surround it. And with that, I'll leave it for questions from you all, if you have any.
Well, thank you. As Jackie Betts said earlier, I was approached not just by one citizen, Nancy, who's here, but by several actually interested in not necessarily the Tree USA program, but just for the city to be more involved in for the same reasons that you've outlined here. So it's really good to have this help and support. This is not one of those areas where we would be a groundbreaking city to do this. We are sort of a little late to the game, which is what some people have said to us. How come these little cities down the road are members and we are not? So this is, we're playing catch up here. And we had not included this in our original goals at the beginning of the year. So perhaps this is something we can set, you know, December 15th next year for the application, but you can give us some feedback on that. I don't know if you want to try to do this over a 2 or 3 week period, but
so I think, first of all, because it's a work session and we shouldn't formally be making decisions, if I see head nods or consensus that this is something that you are interested in us pursuing in 2024, then I would certainly put a work plan together, because I would assume, first of all, I just wanted to address a couple of things. One, the city does have dedicated funds that meet the $2 per capita. That's approximately $25,000 annually, and we already have that in our budget. So it's like, check, we've got that. We have a fantastic nonprofit group that does Arbor Day celebration at the Gladstone Nature Park. So check, right? I think delegating a person at the city or creating a tree board is where I would like some guidance, because I do think you need to have some comprehensive community outreach before we just say, here's the tree ordinance and away we go. I think we need to have some engagement from the community. So that is one area that I would work with Brittany on, putting an engagement process together. We could certainly prepare a resolution or a proclamation, and I think meet the other thresholds. It's just really talking about reviewing Chapter 3.3 in the city's municipal code relations to trees, and talking about how are we going to engage the community in this process. So that's kind of, and that's why our public works director is here as well, because we are assuming that we're going to be given head nods to try to keep moving forward to put a timeline together. And we wanted to know if there were any other questions that you had of Brittany while she's here. I have no doubt that she would be helping Gladstone go through this process. But for me, it's really trying to figure out, and maybe it's a combination of having a staff person and a tree board, or we call it maybe a stakeholder task force at first, which is like a temporary board. And then maybe if we do become Tree City USA and it's going to be a permanent, then that's when the city creates an actual tree board.
Okay, well, I appreciate that you and Brittany have had these conversations and have thought this through to give us this guidance on the steps that we would need to take forward if this were something we would want to pursue. I have one question about it. I think I started hearing from people about this around the same time that the city of Portland was, there was a lot of publicity about them publicly disengaging from their connection with a group called, what was it?
Friends
of Trees, yes. That often helped individual homeowners plant street trees near their homes. One of your, the tree care ordinance section of this, you talked about guidance for planting and maintaining and removing trees on public property.
No, private, or yeah, no, you're right.
Public property. But do cities that join this also encourage private homeowners to plant more trees, and are there often support given to those efforts?
That is a great question. Yeah, so each tree city and each municipality, even if they're not a tree city, sort of approaches tree ordinances and things like that differently. I know communities that only address publicly owned trees, and for the Tree City USA standard, that's all that you need to do is publicly owned. Some communities like Portland also include regulations around private trees because they consider it infrastructure for the city. So there's sort of different ways that you can do it. And I would just suggest getting community engagement, especially around private property, and doing what works for your community in Gladstone.
I know that from what I read about some of our surrounding communities, some of the ordinances have to do with when you can remove a tree, for example. And there are different feelings among the public about how easy it should be or shouldn't be to remove trees. And also people are trying to, put that against the fact that because of climate change, there are a lot of trees which used to be considered native and thrived very well in our climate in certain regions that now, because we're getting gradually warmer, they don't do as well. And some of those trees are dying, and removal of the tree might be the best thing for the community, replace it with something else. But there's something that needs to be in ordinances too. So it's not as easy an issue to deal with, and different cities do it in different ways. And I'm glad that we've reached out to the people who are in contact with several different municipalities, because we need to see different models to know what will work the best for Gladstone.
Yeah, and a lot of the times what helps to, especially whenever you're first developing an ordinance or an urban forestry management plan, or like on a path to becoming a Tree City USA, is having those peer-to-peer groups. So a community that's similar in size to Gladstone, and seeing, how they work and what they've sort of learned through this process as well. So that's something I'd be happy to facilitate, and I have ideas for. I guess just any and all areas of support for that. But one thing that's sort of coming to mind too, when you're talking about climate change, I just want to say that aside from the Tree City USA program, urban and community forestry, the Oregon Department of Forestry was just awarded $26 million from the Inflation Reduction Act grant. So we're going to be standing up a lot of pass-through grants to help support urban forestry efforts throughout the state. So I just want to say that as an opportunity ahead of the time. Requests for proposals won't be going out until March, but for things like climate change mitigation, especially in disadvantaged communities, is going to be a big focus of that grant. So just putting that out there as well.
That's good to know. All right. Councilor Reichel, I see your hand on the screen. So I will call on you. Councilor Reichel is our liaison to our Parks and Recreation Board. So she has that involvement in some of the trees around our city, but I know this is an area of interest to her as well. Go ahead, Councilor Reichel.
I was just curious, kind of reviewing the standards, and I'm not sure if this is a question that, well, this first one is probably something Brittany would answer. Is the tree board something that can be, like, could that be a part of our existing Parks and Recreation Board?
Absolutely.
Where
yes.
they would, okay.
Yeah, a lot of communities actually do it that way. Like they have like a climate change committee or a parks committee or someone that will act as their tree board. They just have to be designated as a tree board and talk about trees to meet the standard.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And then I guess my second question, and maybe this is something that I'm going to have to, I think Jackie mentioned 3.3 in the municipal code, but I was curious if we have an existing tree care ordinance, would it meet the requirements for this program, or do we need to reevaluate?
I'd have to read your code, so unsure.
I think where we got with that, Councilor Reichel, is that's when it became complex, because as we first started reading our code, we decided that our code is very antiquated, by the way, as you know, but that's where it's really going to take the community engagement process, especially like the mayor alluded to, if we're going to start talking about private property, because a lot of folks don't like when government tells them what they can and can't do on their own property. And we need to be very careful with that process. But we do need to review our current code in regards to trees. And if we designate the Parks Board to be that tree board, also keep in mind there might be other people in the community that specifically are interested in this topic and also want to be included.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I just was kind of trying to think from the standpoint of, we don't really maybe necessarily have the ability to add a whole department or an individual that this is their full-time job. So yeah, just thinking about how that would happen. Okay, thank you. I think that answers my questions.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Cook?
Yeah, looking at, it looks like there's a lot of benefits to the program. One of the benefits was access to resources and advice, forestry advice. Just thinking about what parties that would be available to. So obviously the city of Gladstone. How about individual, homeowners or property owners within Gladstone? Would they also have access to advice and guidance? Also, we have a wonderful organization, Friends of Gladstone Nature Park, that does a lot of urban forestry work
I have
in our
heard
city.
of them. Yeah.
Would Councilor Arlington works with them closely. So, would an organization like that also be eligible for some support and guidance through this program?
Sure. Yeah. Let me clarify a little bit. So the Tree City USA program does sort of open some doors as far as like being able to network with other tree cities and sort of be plugged into that community. But my program, the Urban and Community Forestry Assistance, is available to everyone that lives in Oregon, regardless of if you're a tree city or not. So if the group that you're talking about, or even private landowners, have any questions about trees, our doors are open. That's why we're here. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Councilor Alexander?
I just wondered, because I don't know much about trees, but I like them. But I talked to people downtown, and I think when we were talking about a revitalization, I've heard from a number of people, and you might know, Mayor, some of those trees that are in Portland Avenue are not from here. They're not supposed to be planted in Oregon. And so if we did a revitalization, some of those trees would have to come up. And would we replant? Or, what do you do? How's that work? A tree city? What do you doesn't matter what trees in your city, or if as long as it's okay? What?
Yeah, I think this is a bigger question around like how to manage your urban forest. And there's a lot of different ways for support, I think, for what you're talking about, which is having an approved street tree and park tree species list, which is definitely something that I do all the time. And within our urban environments, oftentimes trees are not native to Oregon, and they're planted from all over the place. I think the most commonly planted tree probably in Gladstone and in this area of the Willamette Valley is actually a Norway maple, and other cherry trees that aren't native to Oregon. So they are important to have in our urban environments because they're a little bit more resilient to harsh things that some of our natives can't handle, but it's good to have a good diversity of tree species, whether that be age diversity, genetic diversity, size class diversity. That'll just make your urban forest more resilient. And then the other part of that, I would say, is it's definitely a good idea to have best management practices around what tree can go where. I like to say right tree, right place. Because if you have a large form tree in a small planting strip, that's going to cause problems for public works and everybody, and nobody's going to want that. but we want to sort of maximize benefits and put trees where they want to go. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed when I was job shadowing this summer in Public Works, as we're in the street sweeper, we have trees that are really hard to even get our own equipment under because of how close they are out into the street. And so there's all of these elements and components that we have to look into as we go through this process. So.
Councilor Roberts, did you have some questions?
I was just curious if you could speak to, you talked about the governing board for trees needing to exist. What really is the scope of that? Because you listed a couple things here, but what, if it were to be assimilated into an existing group, like Councilor Reichel mentioned, what would be the additional workload taken on?
Like, what's the role of a tree board?
Essentially,
yeah.
If you could elaborate further on.
Sure. So I've got some resources for that, and it's going to look different depending on your community, but in a more general sense, your tree board is going to inform management decisions that happen. It could sort of make recommendations for urban forestry management plans, approve street tree lists, having, best management practices. What do we want to see in Gladstone? What are the issues around trees in Gladstone? And what is the path to fixing those things? And on a sort of general level, I think that's the role of a tree board. There's probably a better worded document I could share with you around that too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they could meet 2 times a year.
Yeah, they could. Some of them meet
monthly?
annually. Yeah.
All right. Councilor Huckabee, did you have any questions?
Thank you. I was just curious if after the fact you could share the science-backed evidence on the decreases crime.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd love to look at that.
I'll share a couple of interesting articles with you. For sure.
Councilor Garlington?
Well, you know me, I'm interested. I have a couple of questions, and I know this is probably down the line just a little bit, but have you heard of cities that have different types of ordinances for like park trees, street trees, and private land trees, where they've got those separated out so that some of our neighbors who might be concerned about government coming down on them in their own private land, to separate that out?
Yeah.
Is that something that's possible? You don't have to tell me how. I'm just wondering if it's possible.
Yes.
Okay. And then one of the things that I guess I would come back to Administrator Betts for is one of the things that I never call it plagiarizing. I call it homework, but to pull out different communities that have the ordinances and the Tree City certificate, and to bring those 2 items together and maybe have us look at a few of them so that we could compare and look and see what might be a hardship for us, but what might be a complete push through, no worries.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that would be really good for us to have also.
Have I shared that with you already, Jackie?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have done some preliminary, trust me, we've been trying to make this as easy and as smooth as possible. But yes, we have looked at other model ordinances to try to figure out what we could use, but also understand that Gladstone has some unique components that we would need to work through.
Okay. Yeah.
And like I said, I'm happy to support in that ordinance process.
Okay. Well, you got my nod.
Well, I'm sensing a consensus that this is something we could do, and I appreciate knowing that we're partway there. I mean, we've met some of the requirements already, and that there are the resources available, so willing to help us. I think Councilor Garlington often is our most eloquent speaker, is the value of parks in our community, that for a lot of people in the urban environment, getting away to a park is important. But I also believe that people like to have a park-like setting in the area in which they live. And so anything we could do to bring the advantages of trees and greenways for walking and things like that to the community as a whole, not just in defined park settings, but in the whole city, I think is a positive step for us to take. And it will enhance, I think, public support of the parks that we have, and provide a broader scope of opportunity for people to engage in nature and to engage with one another, which is one of the other things that you say is an advantage to this. So I'm glad that people reached out to me. I'm glad that we have the resources that we do. At first it sounded a little easy, then it sounded a little harder. Now it sounds a little easier because of the support we would get. So am I sensing some support for that? This is something we should pursue? All right. Well, Brittany, we are grateful to you for all you've done with our Administrator Betts so far on this, for you coming and sharing with us tonight and making us feel hopeful about this as something for the future of our city.
Good. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. Oh, it's my dream job. I won't. Yeah. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. All right, Jackie, did you receive enough guidance, do you think, to?
I did. Thank you.
Okay. And Darren, thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate what your department has done in this regard. You know, our last city council meeting, we talked about having to deal with, the tragedy of losing so many trees because of the ice storm, and how the city had to find a way to respond to that, and even had to establish new policy just at our last meeting for what would happen in the future if we did it. So, thinking these things through, not relying on code that's 30, 40 years old. I know that there is a list of trees, approved trees or recommended trees somewhere in our comprehensive plan, I think, or maybe it's in our code. But we need to review that too, I think, to bring these things up to date. So I'm glad we have the resources and peer cities to help us in that regard. I like your idea of, looking at some examples of code and then, so we're not starting from zero on that. Okay. The next item on our agenda is next steps for Gladstone Youth Council. We've had a couple of presentations from other cities that have an existing youth council. And Brittany, you don't need to stay for the whole meeting. Just neither do you, Nancy. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. So much.
All right. So, Jackie, I will let you introduce the next item as well.
Turn the page. Okay. So let's talk about one of our city council goals, and that is exploring youth advisory councils. So I put a brief summary in your packet that talks about what we've done to date, which includes having a couple of presentations. One was from Happy Valley, the other was from Oregon City. We were in contact today with West Lynn. They are going to do a presentation with two of their youth council members, but they did not get back to us on which one before tonight's meeting. But I do know it will either be in January or February. And then included in your packet is also some information on the City of Cottage Grove's program and the City of Tualatin. So at this point, it's kind of a check-in to see, yes, do we still want to move forward with creating one? I also gave you some questions that maybe will help in our discussion if maybe the mayor wants to go through the list of questions for the council to consider, and then we can talk about what the next steps are.
Okay, well, I will take your suggestion and do it in the way you've said. First of all, from what you've heard so far, is this still something that we feel like we want to move forward with? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nodding, so I'm going to assume that there's agreement on that. And the next thing is on the timing of it. Again, we wanted to incorporate this among all the various things that we as a council are responsible for looking at. You like to do things within a certain amount of time if you can, but it's been suggested here, can the city create a timeline to implement this by September 2024? Because as we discovered, some of these other cities do it on a school year basis. So the year of involvement in this is not the calendar year or the budget fiscal year, but a September to June or sometimes through the summer if they choose to. Does that make sense for us to start in September and go through June for the first year of this? Councillor Roberts.
As much as I'd love to see it happen tomorrow, I think moving at government speed is the correct move, Mayor.
Okay. Is there agreement on that? All right. So if that kind of a timeline might be adopting an ordinance in March 2024 and then accepting applications at the end of April, appoint people by May and let them have their first meeting in September. And most of our other city commissions and boards have about 7 members. We heard from cities, I think, had slightly larger committees than that. But again, this is the first one. And I think it was Happy Valley who said they weren't sure if they'd get enough. And then they ended up with more. And so they expanded the size. But does 7 sound like a reasonable starting point to keep it consistent with other?
Yes, but if we have the same issue,
Yeah.
we have the leniency to expand also.
All right, so we can set it up for 7, and we can certainly make a change if we wanted to. That was Councillor Huckabee's comment.
They get involved, the better.
All right, the more they get involved, the better. And Councillor Reichel's having trouble hearing those comments because I don't think either of you had your microphones on, but we'll work on that.
The more, the better.
So other comments on those questions about just sort of the procedure of getting started and the timing. What about which elected officials would want to be involved? I know when the representatives of Oregon City came, Commissioner Marl and Mayor McGriff said they both had some pretty direct involvement with this. And some of the cities talked about whether staff are involved. We don't have a designated staff person right now because the committee doesn't exist, but that's something else we'd want to give thought to. And are there individual councilors who have an interest in this and see this as something okay, Councilor Roberts, you're backing off. You said no.
I think one thing to be cognizant of is I think we have 3 seats that are going to be up for election or re-election in 2024. So I think either we choose, my suggestion would be to choose someone who has more time left in their term, or choose 2 representatives and have at least one of those people be someone who has a lengthy term remaining.
Okay.
Just because the timeline here, where this first meeting won't be starting until September, I think just to make sure that we have continuity, I think will be helpful.
All right. And we may need people to be involved during the selection process as well. If there are interviews to be conducted or questions to be prepared or something. So as we work toward this, and maybe after we get this last thing, I'll come back to this question about asking for involvement. And I will take into consideration your recommendations about the balancing that among people who can continue to make a continued connection with it. Other comments on that question? Yes, Councilor Garland.
So I do, because I listened very carefully to the people from Happy Valley and from Oregon City. It didn't sound to me like there was a small amount of time invested, especially with the Happy Valley crew. They had a team of 2 people that weren't even counselors that were very invested in the group of kids that they were working with. And it was partially through the school, partially, and then to be that conduit to the city council that was helping them out. So that's a large, that's a large amount of time. And then listening to our Oregon City friends, they were talking, it didn't sound like that was just a meeting a month. It was an ongoing, type of thing. So I think one of the things that we need to find out is, what does that look like for our staff in order to add these hours into a staff person's day? And what would the expectation of our council be? And I am in no way lowering or raising somebody's ability at the office, but are you looking for just someone in the city? Are we looking for our administrator to be that conduit? So I think these are things that really have to be thought out, because we are talking about staff time and we are a small staff, about exactly what that's going to look like and who's going to do it. And I think that Luke and Vanessa, I think that it's great that you guys want to do it, because I believe that both of you have a really good rapport with the school kids. And I think that you would be able to get a really good program going forward, just knowing that, you know, you're close at hand. So I commend you both for that. Really, I do. I like to have things right out there.
Yeah, you've raised some really important issues on this, and because of the size of our city and the size of our school district, we're not in the same place as some of the cities we've heard from already. They had representatives at different high schools. We have most of our high school students in Gladstone go to Gladstone High, but I wouldn't think we would want to restrict it only to Gladstone High students. We have some private school students and homeschooled students and others that could be involved and make a good contribution as well. But there may be the opportunity to have some high school staff who would be willing to also help oversee this and provide a connection. So we want to look to those resources, council liaisons, local staff at the city level, and again, at a reasonable amount of time commitment. Right. And then maybe connections within the community as well to oversee. This is one of those things where you never know how much are youth capable of governing themselves and running their own program. And from what I saw from some of these other cities, they were doing an amazing job of it. And as we know, sometimes that kind of leadership can be a stepping off point to something even greater in the community. So we want to encourage as much direct leadership among the youth themselves as we can, but provide the kind of support that will enable them to know, that their ideas and projects are going to get a good reception in our community.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And one of the things I would think as a high school student, if I was to put my name on a list that said, yeah, I want to go forward with this, I think part of my expectation would be that I would be learning from my peers and not just having a meeting once a week with pizza and soda. So I think that it really needs to be a thoughtful program that not just has leadership, but has a plan.
Yeah.
So, and again, I go back to how is that plan going to come together, and where is those hours going to come from based on who we're asking to do what? And I love the idea of calling up somebody at the school, maybe Ginger or something like that. She's in, or Raymond is, they're both into those newer positions that the school has, that maybe that's somebody that could be a conduit. Again, that's their job. And does their job allow for these hours that our council is asking for? It's like asking somebody to volunteer at work. Well, is that on work hours or is that on private hours? So that's always something to be considerate about.
Councilor Roberts, you may know the answer to this. I know that some high schools in recent years have required a certain amount of kind of community service work for their students as even a graduation requirement. Is that something that was in place when you were at Gladstone High School?
In many cases that does exist, but for Gladstone, that is not a graduation requirement.
Okay, but it's still encouraged, right?
Certainly. And many of the existing leaders within the student organizations are a part of different organizations that do require those volunteer hours. So the Key Club, the National Honor Society, those sorts of things do require a certain amount of hours, not only for membership, but also for the incentives like the additional cords at graduation and whatnot.
Oh, okay. Good to know. All right. So that there's an incentive then for involvement in a program like this among young people.
Certainly.
And I thank you, Administrator Betts, for including in the staff report this on the second page of our agenda for this particular item, promoting youth voices in local, from a document called Promoting Youth Voices in Local Decision Making, Global Youth Council Guide, some of the dangers and pitfalls. So in addition to some of the concerns that Councilor Garlington has expressed, which are kind of some of them I think are sort of overlapped in this list. We need to consider these things in trying to design staffing levels, budgeting levels, if we do some, and support from the committee and the public. So this is helpful information to have as we go forward to try to design this. Other comments or questions? All right, am I hearing a consensus on going ahead with this as well and doing it on the kind of the timeline that's been proposed, maybe trying to start in September 2024 with that class?
Councilor Reichel.
Yes, Councilor Reichel.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you to Councilor Garlington for, that was a lot of really thoughtful feedback that you put it into words in a way that I could not, but a lot of similar thoughts. I think that I really would like to see this for Gladstone, but I have to agree with Councilor Garlington that we have to be really, really thoughtful about this process because we don't maybe have the resources, and we also really need to make sure that we are providing that opportunity to everyone in our community to be to apply for this. So I would love to see us get this put together, but we just have to be, again, really thoughtful. So I hesitantly agree with moving forward with this.
Well, I think it's great that we go forward with our eyes wide open on some of the areas that other cities or jurisdictions have discovered could be a problem, and to try to mitigate that as best we can, and not just say, "Oh, let's do it," without thinking it through. So I'm glad we're getting that feedback from several of you.
Maybe.
Councilor Huckabee.
Thank you. There's a lot of concern about staff time, and yeah, we don't have a very large staff here at Gladstone. But there's always a way to look for other options. And maybe that is even, we have one community member adult on this particular, council, and they can volunteer to help, do all the stuff that the staff can't. Like, there's so many answers that we can brainstorm and come up with that will not put all of the stress on our staff.
I agree.
So.
All right. Well, I'm seeing some thumbs up and heads nodding. So I think, again, the consensus is here. And I want to thank staff for preparing us so well. And the fact that we've got another opportunity to hear from yet another city in our area that has done this. So review some of the council goals and sort of bylaws for these committees and other communities, and read about some of the things that they do or have done. I think Administrator Betts, you mentioned to me that when you and Marcy were out on at the Halloween event, you were thinking that maybe this is the kind of an event that a youth council might really enjoy providing some leadership for. And I think if we look at other things that we do in the city and think about it in that same way, we may, and of course the council may come up. I mean, the council in Happy Valley was having a really training educational thing on mental health issues for young people. I mean, they may go way beyond what we think is a good contribution to the community. So I think with a combination of encouragement and trust in their awareness of the needs of their peers, I think we can come up with something really good. All right, let's move on to item number 3.
Okay, so this item is also a city council goal on communication and engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion training for elected officials and employees. Again, this is a time for us to check in. I did provide some history in the staff report that talked about the discussions that we have publicly had to get us to this point tonight, that talked about, do we want to hire a consultant to do some group work? And I believe it was in July that the council decided that they wanted to engage in some self-guided resources. I listed those resources that the city attorney and I had provided. There's multiple video library books that don't cost anything to the city for that. And so this really is just a time for the council to have a conversation about how they feel that they're educating themselves, and if there's anything else from a staff perspective that you would like us to help with.
Thank you. I know that we kind of, there was this debate about whether we try to do something collectively as a group, a training that we were all participating in. And there was enough disagreement over that at the time that we kind of put it to individuals to do some self-education work. So we kind of want to see where we are following that and where we go from here. So, Administrator Betts, once again, I appreciate you providing this history and background and summarizing it for us, because when it's something we kind of do behind the scenes on our own, it's not very apparent that much is going on. The public hasn't seen the discussion that we have with you individually on how these issues are shaping out our own plans and our own attention to the work that we do here as city councilors and mayor. So who would like to start with either a summary of something that you've learned from your own self-education, some concern about where we go forward on this? Are we still at the place where we want to try to develop a training for the leaders? The staff has been going through a number of trainings already, different departments, but it's still up to leaders to have a discussion on this. Councillor Huckabee.
Can I make a request that we keep this conversation about what we have done, where we want to go forward, and not debate what DEI is or is not, or our beliefs in any way? Straight goal.
All right. Are we in agreement on that?
There was a lot of disagreement last time, so I'm just trying to keep us on track with our goal of this conversation.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I'll begin with some comments. I read some of the books on this list that was provided to us, and some others that I read. I quoted an excerpt from Sarah Sanderson's book, which talked about, which is more historical in nature, about why we are at the place we are in race relations here in Oregon. And one of the things that impressed me, and the reason I chose to share that excerpt in the place where I usually had done a land acknowledgement for Indigenous people in this community, was that it brought to mind the deep connection that we have with Indigenous people in this community. We look historically at Gladstone going back to 1911, and some people look at the community before that, but it has to go back much farther. And I've had 2 letters from citizens just in the last couple of weeks wanting to know, for example, why the city doesn't observe or acknowledge Native American Heritage Day. And perhaps the reason is not even all Native Americans are appreciative of the fact that that day has been scheduled for, Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, which is not a holiday that many Native Americans appreciate anymore. I don't mean to speak for them, but I just say there's even controversy over whether that is a good date for that observance. As we've come to know through Mrs. Sanderson's book, this area north of the Clackamas River and south of it as well has sacred value to the people whose ancestors were here for thousands of years before white settlers came to this area. And I don't know that we do enough in this community to recognize that. So one of the things we might want to think about in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion is the way that we express our appreciation for all the diverse groups that make up our community and have brought us to where we are today. That may mean doing some events in the community. It may mean promoting events that other communities are doing that we could be a part of, that our citizens would appreciate knowing about. But that's one way for us to start thinking about the way that we don't focus just on the history of white people in Gladstone, but that we recognize that we have a more diverse connection in many ways to other peoples, to other communities, to other groups and individuals. I'll start with that. Get some reaction or comments or other comments of similar nature.
So, Mayor, let me just do an add-on to that, because we just had an agreement. Sarah is going to do a presentation at the Gladstone Community Center January 10th. There'll be information in the newsletter about that. That's an example of maybe some of the education or events that we can start doing in Gladstone. So I just wanted to add that on because you guys weren't privy to that yet. But that is an example where internally that staff's trying to look at, can we do multi-generational or underrepresented events, learning centers at our community centers. So that is one example. Sarah, we booked her for the community center in January.
And I think that the student from whom I received a letter, who was also concerned about the fact that what we now call Ames Park and Cross Park along the Clackamas River were burial grounds, sacred land for the indigenous tribes that resided here. And that concern probably, I'm guessing that student may have been aware of that by reading that book or hearing a presentation about it. Because it's not something that was commonly known among many people in this community until Mrs. Anderson did that wonderful book and that delved deep into that history. So I'm glad that we'll have an opportunity to hear more from her. Others who'd like to comment? Thank you, Councilor Garland.
So I took this the suggestion for the DEI training as a personal journey in the last few months, and challenged myself to watch a video or two a month. I've watched the LOC videos. The interesting thing that I found about that was a couple of the videos talked a lot about citizens that are mentally challenged in some ways, physically challenged in some ways, are people that have issues just living day to day and how we can make their lives different. And then you turn on another video and there was a fabulous person. I don't think he was from Texas because he didn't have an accent, but at the time he was living in Texas. And if none of you watch any of the LOC videos but one, do the Better Talk About Race. In fact, he's got a book that I ordered and it was on back order, but I should get it here shortly, that he suggested. But more than that, at the end of his talk, about the last 15 minutes, he talked about different things that we hear about. What is race? What is racial? What is, and I don't remember it verbatim. I'm not going to promise I did, but I did get a lot out of it. And I feel like that was a really good start for me because I'm more of a visual learner than a reading learner. However, we got that list of books and Lord knows I got to get the biggest one going, and that would be The Sum of Us. And that was really interesting. That book talks more of the history of where we are today and how we got here, what has happened over the years to reset where challenges for, I would say, primarily the African American communities and how they've been not just stereotyped, but how they have constantly been pushed down and been brought back up. And you read along in the book and it talks about how people come back up and then all of a sudden this. And as we've come into the year 2000 and beyond that, when they talk about how now that group has, how the group that they began pushing down has grown into many other communities of, they talk about the Polish communities in New York, and they talk about some of the Hispanic communities that are larger in different areas. That's fascinating to me, and how the basic finances that many of us take for granted is not there for this community of people that are constantly being moved down. And that's just how I visualize it. Everybody gets something different out of any book you read. I understand that completely. So I'm going to say this, out of all of that, this personal journey that I've taken, I don't know that I would have wanted to do all. I don't mind watching videos in a group session, whether or not I would want to watch them and have an immediate discussion rather than allowing myself to kind of settle into it and think about it and how I am going to change myself, or how I am going to rethink things that maybe I never even thought I thought. So this personal journey that this council has invited me to be on, I have taken seriously. I have done my homework. I will continue to do my homework. I'm not sure that I have a clear idea of what more this group might want. So I guess that would have to be a discussion. And what specifically, because like I said, some of the videos that I watched, they talk about, race being a diversity. They talk about physical diversities. They talk about mental diversities. That's a lot. That's like a college education, really. And can it be summed up in one afternoon with a speaker who probably would hone in on one particular thing? I don't think so. I think that there's a lot for all of us to learn, and I encourage everyone to stay on their journey.
Thank you for doing that self-reflection and letting us know the value that you found in it. I appreciate that. I had something else I was going to say, but it'll come back to me. But I think we all started at a different place. Oh, I wanted to reflect on a comment that Councilor Alexander made last week, that all of us in the council, from the perspective, and I don't know for sure, but I'm saying that probably from the perspective of our community, we are all people who would be racialized as white. You made that observation. But I know that we all started at a different place on some of these issues, which is, why it's good to reflect individually on what you've learned or how you've grown from something. And from what I understand, a lot of people's life experiences are different because of there's some generational differences in how we approach some of these issues. And people who really felt financially hammered by the recession of 2008, 2009 might identify much stronger with the financial impact of racial barriers to financial success and understand that issue in a different way. One of our citizens, Ralph Mateel, recently posted on Facebook the high school photos of the high school annuals from the early years of Gladstone High when it was first started, like the late 60s, early 70s. And he had pictures of all the classes. And I noticed that all the students, it was a pretty much an all-white high school, the same as my high school was around that era. And so there's a generation of people who don't have the life experience of sitting in school next to a student of color. How do you grow beyond that to become an adult in your 60s and 70s and live in a more racially diverse society or community than we had when you were here as a high school student? I think the fact that we have diversity in age among the council is a helpful and productive thing. And I think the fact that we are looking at diversity beyond that construct of race, and also thinking about neurodiversity. As someone who has grandchildren with autism, I would say, I understand that that's an important distinction and understanding of what constitutes diversity in the community. I know that issues of gender and sexual orientation or the various terms that are used for that. I have a hard time keeping up with all that. That's another part of diversity that wasn't discussed when I was young, but that is very important and central to people of a different age group now, and more easily discussed. So I like the fact that you identified through your reading that diversity is broader than we sometimes think of it. And I've said too much. I want to let other people say more. Councillor Cook.
Yeah, I thank you, Councillor Garlington, for going first. This is a hard one to go first on. Thank you for courageously starting us off. So yeah, I did a couple things to further my own DEI education. I heard you read an excerpt from Sarah Sanderson's book, The Place We Make. I thought that sounded fascinating, and so I read The Place We Make by local author Sarah Sanderson. She lives here in Gladstone, and that was a really solid one for me. That really there were a couple other pieces of research I did that folded in nicely to that. And I'm really excited to hear that we're going to have a chance to hear her speak at the community center. I did some independent research, and I feel kind of, to be vulnerable for a second, I feel kind of ashamed in how I showed up with a friend of mine. A friend of mine shared some research that they had found about the history of racial issues in Gladstone. And some of the things that they shared with me was what you mentioned, Mayor, that, Cross Park and Ames Park, what we now call Cross Park and Ames Park, have been sacred sites to Native people for forever and ever. And so, my lack of knowledge there was something that was a little surprising to me. But even more surprising to me was they told me that what is now the SDA campus on Oatfield Road in the 1920s had been used for huge Ku Klux Klan gatherings where they were inducting people into the Klan. And I was shocked. And the friend who was telling me this was a person of color. And so they were like, yeah, you shouldn't be shocked by that. You live in Oregon. And I shouldn't have been shocked by that. I think a few weeks later, I read The Place We Make, and there's actually a part of that where she talks about, when are white people going to stop being surprised by this? And, shame on me. That's where I was. You hear about these things happening in a very textbook manner, right? And it seems so far removed. But my grandfather was alive then. I could literally throw a rock at this location from my house. So this is really personal and really close. And I think it's not hard to draw a line between, the KKK meeting on the Chautauqua grounds in the 1920s and the hate groups meeting in our town today. And so I think what I took away from that is, yes, we're doing this work to further our own education now as individual counselors and as individual humans. But something that, I'm left with, I don't have a good answer for, is what do we do next, right? What do we do now? How do we heal these wounds? And I don't have I didn't come away with a cut and dry answer. But I think it's a question that we need to continue to ask ourselves. I went back to the council goals because I wanted to see, like you were saying, where do we go from here? What's next? What's the purpose of this? And I think the stated council goal was really simple. It was really, in my opinion, small, which was DEI training for electeds and employees. And I think that that's a great first step. But I think we would be really remiss if we didn't take that as a first step and then say, what do we do from here? I think, Mayor, I love your idea of celebrating diverse community events so that everybody knows they have a place here and that they're celebrated and welcomed here in Gladstone.
And it's not my idea. I share it, but
You're the first
it's
one
not original to me. But yes, go
first
ahead.
one to speak to it here tonight. I think it also, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like we do have, I think everybody up here would be racialized as white. We're diverse in some ways and not diverse in other ways. So I think my suggestion would be to come up with some mechanism to listen to the community about ways in which they feel like they could be better served, or they could be better listened to, or where we're missing out on supporting them and serving them as well as we do other members of the community. I don't know if that's an in-person listening session. I don't know if that's an online survey. I don't know what that would be, but my suggestion would be to open the conversation up to the community and ask them the question of where are you being well served and where are you not being well served by the city. I've heard from people outside of Gladstone that feel like Gladstone is not a safe place for them to be. And that's heartbreaking because I love the city. When my friends are buying homes, I'm the first one to evangelize, please move to Gladstone. This is the best little community. So hearing that it's unsafe for some people is really challenging and sobering. So my suggestion is where we go from here. I think doing some sort of listening sessions and really continuing to ask ourselves the question ongoing, how can we better serve everyone in this community?
And I think you said something that reminded me of a comment you made a couple of weeks ago too about reducing the barriers that exist for people. And Councilor Garlington, you mentioned with people with physical issues that maybe we have to think in terms of accessibility. And I think some of these, where was it in something we got recently from Administrator Betts, the discussion of this maybe at an LLC event. Some communities, when they talk about this, and not getting in the definition, but they expand it to talk about not just diversity, equity, inclusion, but also accessibility, which a lot of us tend to think of in terms of people with neurological differences or physical differences. But also, I think it's that accessibility, that sense of feeling like you are welcome and would be comfortable here. And I think we have institutions in the community like a library, which are dedicated to making resources accessible to everyone, and also to being a place that is accessible to everyone. We are finally building a building which will be up to those standards. And there are requirements, and we are finally sitting in a building which is more accessible to people than it has been in the past. Now, we don't have someone up here doing an ASL translation of our discussion. We don't have Spanish language translation of this. We don't have Ukrainian or Russian translation of this. There are a lot of ways we are not as broadly accessible as we could be, but at least someone who relies on a wheelchair for their mobility is able to get into this building because we don't have a malfunctioning elevator as we did in the last one. So we're making progress, but just to be attentive to those things and to think about them and to think what is the next little incremental step we could make to move us further in that direction, I think is important. Okay. Councilor Alexander.
I'll speak after that. So I'll agree, first of all, with Councilor Cook. Oregon has a horrible history. That's what I've learned. I mean, not just Gladstone, Oregon, horrible. Yeah. Okay, so I didn't know that. And something else, I'm not going into what it is, but last time Councilor Huckabee, I thought it was just ethnicity, right? That's what I was talking about 2 weeks ago. And she said, no, it's more than that. And when I started looking up and doing my research, it's people of different races, ages, ethnicities, abilities, disabilities, genders, religions, cultures, sexual orientations. It covers just a broad spectrum that I wasn't aware of, because as you all know, I'm pretty close to an African-American family, right? And I hear them, I get their responses, and I think, well, I'm covered because I'm hearing from them, right? No, I had a conversation with him too, and I said, "You guys don't know it all either, you know." So I've learned a lot going on, and then I got given a book, and I started reading it, and it's not one of the books that was recommended. It's actually other thing, like I was telling you earlier, you know, that with the Supreme Court ruling of affirmative action on the college campuses, they're saying that diminished a lot of the companies with their DEI and things like that. So I don't know. I was reading this book and I thought, okay, this is not the book they want us to read or know about, but that's also a diverse stance too, right? Other opinions. So, but I think I ran on it. If you look at my voters pamphlet thing, I want everyone to be welcome in my community. That was the biggest thing I put on the top, and I do, and whatever we have to do it. People at the community center. I think what's going on is we could be aware and we could do our own research, but I don't see the public knowing as much. You know what I mean? You're going out there and you're talking to people about it. I don't know. Like I told you, I was called a hypocrite for, you know, you're all white sitting up. They don't understand all the different, you know, skills and this and that, what diversity is or what it brings to the table. So I think educating the public is probably one of the, you know, like you with that cake. I never knew that. You know, that's where I learned to drive. SDA. And I did those things you just don't know. And you just go blindly through your day. And when you start doing this and you do, I think I've learned more doing my own individual research, you know, on both sides. But I mean, I see both stances, but I'm sort of leaning that it doesn't matter what these other people think. Everybody needs to be included. So that's where I'm at. And that's what I got out of it. So,
well, thank you. That's good to hear. Let's see, Councilor Roberts or Councilor Huckabee, any other comments, reactions?
Yeah, I think we should all weigh in. I agree with Councilor Cook, just like Councilor Alexander said. I think that engaging the public on this is critical because, you know, we can sit up here and do everything we can to educate ourselves on this topic, or just like if it's a wastewater issue, we still want to involve their input. That's why we ask for it. And so I think that the only way we can strengthen ourselves, or it's not the only way, one of the best ways we can strengthen ourselves, my apologies, is by including their input, finding out where our shortcomings or our failures even are, and what we can do to strengthen those, so that going forward, we can ensure that we really do meet those goals of including everyone, and there isn't anyone that feels left out or is left out. I think that's our job as a city council, is to include everyone. They elected 7 of us to do that job, and so we should make every opportunity for that possible.
I like how you say things in 7 words that I wouldn't have to use 30 words for.
Well spoken. Thank you.
Councilor Huckabee.
Thank you. So much. Thinking this discussion was going to go in a different manner tonight. I made a whole list of everything I've been doing since we started talking about, you know, our self-education, but there's no reason to read it all out. It's a lot. It's extensive. Couple of things. I like what you said, Councilor Alexander, about educating our public, and how you said, you know, they don't know how exhaustive this list is. So what do we do as the leaders of the city to help them understand?
That's a question.
You know, like how do we do that? Yes, having some way of surveying, listening session, you know, town hall, whatever that may look like, is valuable. We definitely need to know where our weaknesses are. I think we have some guesses individually, you know, what we can do better. I also want to say that when we made this goal, I never thought that money was going to be a deciding factor in what we did. Obviously, within reason. I'm not saying let's go spend $25,000 in DEI tracing. Within reason. And there was a lot of pushback against spending funds during our last discussion of this. I still think there's value in a group training. We can sit in our living rooms, our offices, and, you know, research this stuff and educate ourselves. But if we're not here to be like, well, how do we apply this to this going on in Gladstone? You know, amongst us, it's a conversation that needs to be had. one thing that I think, finding little tidbits of how we get information in front of people. One thing I had written down on our staff report for this tonight is, again, we don't know what we don't know, right? And all of us know different things. So one thing that we implement at my company is we have this great and portable calendar that we can import into our own personal calendars. And it has all of the cultural, milestones throughout the year. So I might not know what week is, whatever, but now I can see it. And now I can initiate, well, what is that about? And there's even some, religious holidays in there because everybody has different religious holidays as well. But putting, those little things, visibility in front of employees and us, and maybe even a calendar on our website for the city. But just, bringing those awareness, and these are just little things that we can start with. Be like, oh, hey, what do you know about, Diwali? What do you know, about those types of things? And then we can create more conversations. And that's where changes is made, with conversations.
Can I touch on that for a second?
Sure, go ahead.
I think, how about taking like some of the money and putting it towards events like the mayor was talking about to bring people together in certain, groups or whatever, and see how that works. I like you say, what was Councilor Cook saying? The lady's going to talk at the community center that wrote the book. Okay, I'll tell you one thing right here. I don't know if he wants me to say his name or not, but I met down at Meldrum Bar one day with a person I knew, didn't know, met him, sat there for 2.5 hours and learned more than I could have ever learned in so many things. So, and it was great. And to get people like that to come and tell what they know and hear their stories, I think it just broadens and more people hear it and the word of mouth goes out, so even if it was to fund something, $500, whatever, use that kind of money to do those events like you're talking about would be something that I think would include everybody, and you'd like to go, I don't even know what examples, you know what I mean? Cinco de Mayo, it's the Hispanic community, put on something for them. You know what I mean? Just things like that. I think that some of the money would if you want to, throw some money at it, but if you don't need to, I don't know. But I think the public needs to be aware.
I think that's great, Councilor Alexander, because as much as I love going to our neighboring communities to go to, Juneteenth or different events like that, I would love to go to them in my own community.
Well, I think one of the things that we have learned from our own exploration of this issue, back several months ago, there was a lot of controversy at the county level because there were proposals coming from individual county commissioners about reducing the funding for the Department of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for Clackamas County. And one of the justifications being made by someone who took that position was that it was primarily an HR thing. It had to do with hiring and employment and non-discrimination. And I think as we're understanding it now, it has to do with much more than that. And so, Councilor Huckabee, you didn't mention it among the list of things that you've done, but one of the things you have done is to step up and serve on an advisory committee to the county commission on these issues. Yes. And provide yet one more voice for recognizing the scope of these things, and to help county commissioners who, like all of us, start in a different place, have different life experiences, and may understand things in a different way, to understand them from a broader perspective than their own, and to see the scope and the importance of this. So I'm grateful to you for not so much representing us, but to have another Gladstone person in a role, in that kind of a role. And I know that's extra time that you've committed, but it's important to you and you've stepped up. So I'm grateful to you. And when we take time in conversation with people, or read a book, or reflect on our own life, or whatever event it takes for it to have some eye-opening experience, I think that's a step forward, and it makes it easier for us to, if we share those kinds of experiences, to come together and find a way that we can do the kind of things that we've mentioned. And then it's not all on us. This is something where we've talked about tonight about a couple of different communities, new advisory committees that might be good to establish in this community. One is related to trees. And maybe we'll do that through our Parks Board. Maybe we'll do that through a group of people who are independently really enamored with that issue itself and want to be a part of a separate group. And then, we talked about forming a youth council, which I hope will be pretty diverse in its makeup as well. Maybe we need some guidance at a local level on this from a group which is more ethnically, racially diverse than we are as a council, but can help serve as, one of the linkages to that listening to the community that you talk about. Whenever we do community engagement, we're also always reminded lately, and this is more than in 20 years ago, that we have to make an intentional effort to reach out and hear from communities that normally don't show up for our public hearings or our workshops or whatever we do. And sometimes that takes a little work on the part of staff. How do you reach a community of people in your city who don't speak the same language that most of you speak? How do you reach a community that maybe has learned to come to mistrust the government or segments of the government on certain issues? So that takes a little bit of thinking and effort. And I think a commitment to being intentional about seeking out that broader representation is a good thing. So I will repeat Councillor Cook's words: not putting barriers in front of people, not making it difficult for people. We have a sad history, even within this century, of passing some rules, zoning rules in this city, which, while not overtly racist, tended to have the effect of being racist. And we went through public hearings 20 years ago banning duplexes in a major part of the city of Gladstone. And I've talked to some people who were supporting it at that time, and it had to do with wanting to keep people out who didn't have the income level to fit into the community in the way that they would like them to. They didn't mention color of skin or anything like that, but I think that's a kind of exclusion and lack of diversity that we don't want to have. And I'm glad that I don't remember if it was this council, I think it was this council that finally adopted the regulations that overturned that barrier to people who needed a different type of housing in their community. Councillor Reichel, you have your hand up. Let me stop jabbering on as I tend to do and let you speak.
Well, you always have something really good to contribute, so I don't mind that you jabber. I just, in listening to everyone kind of talk about the various things that have been, that we've all discovered, and, just sitting here thinking about accessibility and talking about how to remove barriers. I am a good example of that, in a way that, shortly after I was sworn in, I had a physical issue, and I don't have the ability to attend meetings most of the time in person due to that, but I am able to continue to participate and take part in our government experience because of Zoom, so I think we're in a really, really like silver linings of the pandemic situation where we can look to electronic services that may be able to help us make things more accessible, like translation, having transcriptionist or those kinds of things. Like, we should keep that on the radar because it creates accessibility. This isn't just me on Zoom. There's people that are watching our meetings from home. So there's opportunity there. And I just wanted to kind of put that on the radar, as well as we're talking about how to create access to people that may not necessarily be able to walk in and sit down in chambers to attend the meeting. We have had people contribute by submitting their questions electronically, and they come in on Zoom and speak their mind. So we have an opportunity to maybe grow in that particular way, just to keep that kind of on the radar.
Councilor Garlington.
I think that one of the components that we're missing here is meeting people where they are. So it's fine to ask our staff to beg people to come down here and give comment, or to come down and be a part of something that we haven't come up with yet. But for this group to reach out and to be present and or meet people where they are, we're not a group that the rest of the world owes their time to. That's my opinion. The other thing is, when we talk about learning about people's disabilities or why they don't feel included in something, again, you have to show up. You have to be somewhere. You have to be able to meet someone, to have a conversation with someone. And that conversation doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen here. We may get a presentation, but it's not a true conversation. So I know you guys have heard me say this before, but if you want to meet people where they are, volunteer in this community. Go down to one of the churches. They're full of people. There's 7 of them in this community. Go to a park. Go clean up. If you go clean up trash down at Meldrum Bar, there are 15 fishermen dying to have a conversation with anybody else besides the people that they have talked to that day. And I just think it's really important to meet people where they are, to have that conversation, and to be present. Because that's how we're going to learn how to engage with other people, is face-to-face, talking to them. One of the things I learned, here's something for you to take away, the 5-10 rule. If you're 10 feet away from somebody, smile. If you're 5 feet away, say hi.
I'll tell you the best place I did that is, and I just went up to help, but I ended up meeting so many people just in having that conversation like that, was at the food pantry. Mm-hmm. Many great people up at the food pantry, and they just sit and talk to you. You're waiting in line anyway, so you got all kinds of time to talk. And that's a great way to, meet where they're at.
Speaking of the food pantry, I hope you all have been following some of the emails coming out from the city on progress we're making toward getting funding from that. I appreciate Administrator Betts and the county staff working together on this, and we're happy. We'll talk a little bit more about it, I think, on Thursday night when we have our joint meeting with the school board. And I think at that school board meeting too is another time for us to share a little bit about our efforts toward the youth council. If you're up to that, I don't. Is that the item we didn't get on the agenda in a formal way, but we want to? We could have try to.
Yeah, I think that we can incorporate those conversations into the agenda on Thursday.
Good. I want to get a little bit of feedback from you because I have a meeting tomorrow. As you may know, Representative Anessa Hartman serves on a joint subcommittee for transportation planning, which is doing some public hearings related to the prospect of tolling Interstate 205 and all the other highways in Oregon. And they want to have some feedback from public officials, and I'm planning and preparing to give that feedback. They have not yet scheduled the public meeting that will involve the communities of Gladstone, Oregon City, and West Lynn. But there are some meetings coming up on that. I assume still that we've not often talked about this issue separately as a council, but I hope that I have your permission to share our community concerns about, first of all, the traffic diversion that goes through Gladstone as it is, just because of congestion and occasional accidents on the freeway. And then the safety of that. I thought I might make it very personal and talk about Councilor Reichel, who lives on Arlington Street and has to see that diversion right in front of her home, and her son can't ride his bike out in front of his own house because of it. And then also reflect on Councilor Garland, who has to drive on that 205. Is it 5 days a week? Do you commute out? When you work?
15 minutes and sometimes it's an hour.
All right, that's a very good piece of information to me to have, because it should be 15 minutes every day. Yeah. Oh, yes, and I know that. So I think having some personal ways of reflecting on this issue. Yeah, you can't have a printing and direct mail business that you can do from home by Zoom, right?
No, not exactly.
Yes, and not everybody has that privilege of being in the kind of an industry that allows you to work from home. You can't sell books. You can hire people to help you sell books, but you can't sell them from your house. Well, you sort of did for a while, but that's not the same kind of business. Anyway, I'm not going to make any comments at that meeting that I'm speaking for the council, but I sense a consensus that impact especially is a thing that this community is concerned about. And you wouldn't mind me trying to educate the Department of Transportation on that.
Yes.
That'd be great.
And the other elected officials that are on that too.
You can throw in some comments about equity as well.
And yes, that is definitely, and that is the fact that, Councilor Reichel is fortunate to have a kind of a job where she can work from home if need be, or all the time. And I have family members who do that as well. But there is an equity issue in that many professions and many people do not have that opportunity. And we can't rely on that as a way of reducing our need for interstate transportation. So, all right, good to get that feedback.
One thing.
Yeah, one more.
Plan to say. I just want you to know that just because a person has a car and they're on that freeway going to a job does not mean that they make $100,000 a year. Some of those people, there are 3 and 4 people in that car all going to a job that's paying minimum wage. And that is not fair. And it's not fair to the median family who's barely making ends meet. And if we had any extra money, believe me, we'd be spending it at the grocery store.
Right.
So
the proposed tolls are a very it's a very regressive way of funding things, because the people who make the least, it impacts them the most.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
I'm just going to rein this conversation in, because tolling is not on the agenda, that we are including this under the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens when we're talking about. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I just wanted some feedback because I have a tolling strategy Zoom meeting tomorrow, and wanted to be sure that I could speak with your blessing at that. Staff recommends the City Council continue the conversation on what their individual and collective goals are for the coming year. And Councilor Huckabee, you already recommended through some emails to city staff that we review our goals on a regular basis. And I think as we do that and reflect on where we've made some progress, we will also be wanting to set some new goals for new ventures. And I think the conversation tonight is foundational in being able to do that on this particular issue. Did you want to respond to that, or have another?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
But just to be clear, the council has already adopted 2-year goals.
Yes.
And this is mid-year. We have a department head retreat next week to talk about the work plan for 2024 and how we're going to achieve the already adopted goals. We're going to add in the Tree City USA program. And I think that there's some really good takeaways that I noted from your conversation on diversity, equity, inclusion that will give us some tangible results that we can also incorporate into the next year.
Good. So we weren't just talking to hear ourselves talk. We have helped you a little bit.
Yes.
and help staff,
Yes.
I hope. So thank you. Thank you all for participating in the conversation. Councilor Huckabee.
Will we not be having a goal setting session in February then?
No, that's why I wanted to be clear. Those goals are 2024 or for 2 years, 2024 and 2023 and 2024. The next goal setting session will be in January of 2025. So our goals have been adopted already.
So, but we can continue a conversation on how we implement those goals in specific ways.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the goal to, to be a community that embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion in some very specific ways. We can continue to be creative and thoughtful about that. All right. I think we have reached the conclusion of our agenda for tonight. I thank you all for coming, for sharing what I think has been a very productive conversation on a variety of topics that will all enrich this community. So thank you for coming, and we are adjourned at 7:16 p.m.